Hello and welcome back to the Rugby Paper Podcast. With 20-minute red card controversy running rampant throughout the rugby world, you know exactly what's going to be on the menu today. Join myself, Nick Cain, and Brendan Gallagher as we debate all, as well as discussing Newcastle's first win in 581 days. There was a plan this week for a very special episode to introduce New Star International, which is an elite player representation agency, partner arm to New Star Sports, which operates more in the Southern Hemisphere. We were going to get the two founders, John O'Stewart and Gareth Morgan, on. They've pushed back to next week. So, like all great plans, that one has been postponed. If not, it's not abandoned. We'll resume it next week. But today, let's just talk about rugby. It's myself, Nick, and Brendan. I've got four things on the menu, and for the first time in 129 episodes, I'll put it to you. What shall we talk about, guys?
Well, it's going to be a very special episode nonetheless, Ollie. I think red cards. I mean, both me and Nick are lined up, I think, to pile in here from various angles. I think we should acknowledge Newcastle's splendid win, albeit wins over Exeter at the moment are not what they used to be. And one or two other little things out there. We've had a couple of international squads announced in the last couple of days, Wales and Scotland.
Yeah.
And Ireland, I think. So there's plenty to talk about. There always is. It's the end of October.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, the first two things are the most pressing, I think. Let's mention Newcastle. I think the red card discussion will take up the bulk of the episode, but Newcastle is obviously worth a mention as well. 25 losses in a row. Does anyone know how many days it was between their last two wins?
Was it something like 591?
Very close, 581.
Yeah.
581 days between wins. Obviously a long time, and the scenes were fairly raucous. I guess how do we feel about that? I know it won't put an end to speculation. It might instill a little bit of belief in Newcastle. Obviously, the question, we had Ollie Woodburn on from Exeter, and he was optimistic about his side clicking. They clearly haven't done that. But at the same time, is it not a slightly feel-good moment to see, that crowd have something to believe in?
Yeah, I think it is. And, we'll get there. There's still loads wrong with the basic constitution of not having automatic promotion relegation. But it is nice that Newcastle would appear to have become competitive, at least at home. We needed that. On a purely personal level, you've got, 35, 40 professional guys there putting it in every week. It must be so depressing never having the W to celebrate. They still got to go to work on Monday morning. So, they're going to feel good now. And you'd like to think there might be a bit of a feel-good factor, and they'll kick in. And what they've got to do, I mean, let's be realistic. They're still likely to be one of the teams involved in the bottom two come the end of the season. And they will, they could well have to be going head-to-head in a playoff against the leading side in the championship. They've got to keep morale going for the full 8-9 months. They need to win 3 or 4 home matches at least. They need to nick a win on the road. They need to keep picking up bonus points. That's what they need to do. And this is a little start, and it would be a churlish old grump not to acknowledge that.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to go churlish in that case. I think that they're incredibly fortunate to be in the Premiership this season. They should have had a playoff against Ealing last season, and my hunch would be if that had happened, they wouldn't be there. So there is something totally and utterly wrong with the fabric of the English leagues, and the Premiership clubs seem to think that they're a sort of protected species almost. It's just nonsense. I mean, Newcastle have went 25 games without a win. Okay, they got a win. Great. The idea that everybody should celebrate that Newcastle have finally managed to scratch together a win after, what do you say, 590 odd days, 18 months or more. And, I don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. Well done to them for getting a win. But, they've gone 25 games without one, which shows them fundamentally to be unfit for the league. And unless they really get rocket fueled now and get, they need more than a handful of wins to take themselves off the bottom of that, I'm sure. Whether they get them or not, I don't know. It will have instilled some belief in them. There's no question about that. But, I see that, Steve Diamond was sort of talking about that if they go to Gloucester, where they go this weekend, and if they don't get particularly their defence right, they will be on the receiving end of a hiding at Kingsholm. And, so that shows in a way, if the coach is talking about that, the head coach is talking about that, he realizes that it's probably a bit more fragile than other people do. I think that there's just the assumption that they're now going to roll on and be, really sort of craggily competitive for the remainder of the season. Let's see.
Oh.
And, the thing that really, really is a disgrace is the idea that there is an attempt going on at the moment. It may end up in the law courts, it may not. But there is an attempt going on at the moment to again gerrymander the playoff, the promotion relegation playoff, with, on the one hand, the Premiership clubs, or the RFU, in fact, in their negotiations with the Championship, telling the Championship clubs that they could get I think it's a 1-year dispensation up to 5,000. And then 2 years at 7,500, and then in the 4th year they have to have a ground capable of taking 10,000. Now, people have written and said, how can you justify that sort of means of keeping clubs down when the 2 clubs in the Premiership, Sale and Newcastle, don't get anywhere near 10,000? It's a joke. The whole thing is a bloody joke, and English rugby is making itself look stupid.
I can't fundamentally disagree with much of that, Nick.
One bit of flag waving, great, but there are much, much bigger fish to fry here.
All I would say is, and all of that is pretty much would be my view on the overall situation, but none of this, or very little of this, is actually the fault of the Newcastle players and coaches and group. So if you look at it purely on a day-to-day
I don't think
level,
I said that at any stage, Brent.
Yeah, no. But what I'm saying is, I on that level share a bit of their joy at that victory, and also it cannot be bad in the at this stage for the league not to have a team that concedes 80 or 90 points every week. And listen, there are obviously reasons why that was becoming the situation last season. But yeah, overall, everything you say there is sound. The fundamental setup has been a bit of a disgrace for a long time. And, it's drip, drip, drip. They've sort of depowered the Championship sides over about 20, 25 years with decreasingly less investment, increasingly more difficult criteria to get promoted, and in fact, no promotion at all, even available on some, on many occasions. So, yeah, you have to
listen. English rugby is a laughing stock as a consequence of this, allowing a ring-fenced league and creating extraordinary barriers to stop a meritocracy is totally and utterly unacceptable in any sport that considers itself to be a serious professional sport. It's a joke.
But I think that's known, Nick. I think what we've got here is a balance between reprimanding the system that's allowed a 25-game losing streak to, one, happen, but two, go without consequence. And by that, I mean, obviously the consequence on the players and the coaches and morale and having to, turn up to train every day without, necessarily a belief. That is a consequence. But just in terms of pragmatic consequence, that obviously hasn't happened. At the same time, Newcastle has been a mainstay in the Premiership almost since its inception. Of course, it was home to England's greatest ever fly half. It is a flag that the Gallagher Premiership is going to want to play. I just hope that one, yes, we'll see. And if it does start a fire, then fantastic.
They've been dragging along, Ollie. They've been dragging along at the bottom of the league for season after season after season. They are incredibly fortunate to have been saved by the ring fencing mechanisms. And look, I don't have a problem with a side if all the funding issues were sorted out. You would have a meritocracy, and Newcastle would have a chance to rebuild and come back stronger. It happened to Harlequins. It happened to Northampton. It's just a nonsense what's going on at the moment. They have not been fit for purpose in the Premiership for a number of seasons.
No, and I'm not disputing that either. I think what I am saying is that the Gallagher Premiership would be a better place with a competitive Newcastle in it.
Or a competitive Coventry, or a competitive Ealing.
But surely there's parallels here with Italy, who went whatever it was, 31 matches without a win in the Six Nations. And when they won, whenever it was it their glorious win in Cardiff? You can, at the same time, it is possible to enjoy their victory, the moment of triumph, the moment of relief, while also, criticising them for their lack of development, criticising the Six Nations.
I mean, you've done that, and relegation with Georgia. You've been an advocate for Georgia as well. Yeah. So, at the time when we all criticised Italy, they fully merited that criticism, as do Newcastle.
Yeah. But we still shared their joy in victory when they did win. And I think it was the win in Cardiff, wasn't it? When they got that brilliant try in the last minute. Was that
like I say, I'm not going to denigrate their players. Steve Diamond has been forecasting this win since about 2 months before the season started. So he got there in the end. I'm not denigrating their players at all. Well done to them for getting over the line. But the idea that I'm going to bloody well start cheerleading because Newcastle have finally won a game, and there is a danger that what will happen is that it will perpetuate what is a basket case of a league. No, not me.
I think galvanise is hopefully the word. I mean, Italy's win galvanised them. And now Italy are more than just a stumbling block in the Six Nations.
Although, alas, it hasn't galvanised the Six Nations.
And Italy don't have to play week in, week out, Ollie.
It's the structure.
Italy don't play week in, week out. They play 5 bloody fixtures in the Six Nations. Okay, so it's not the same.
It's not. But also the signs were, Steve Diamond, he's been in charge for 11 games, or had been in charge for 11 of those 25. Newcastle were more competitive towards the end of last season, and their forward pack, for example, which obviously you yourself, Nick, will fully agree is the platform of any successful rugby team, that it absolutely overpowered Exeter's. And I think that is itself encouraging that there is at least a foundation for Newcastle to compete up front in a way that they just haven't been able to in the last 12.
How's this? How far have Newcastle come, and how far have Exeter fallen? Now, we're going to find out over the course of the season, but if Exeter don't get a hurry up, they're going to be stranded. We're going to have the same situation that we had last season, where Exeter and Newcastle are struggling at the bottom of the table. Most of the games that they play end up being gimmies to the other team, which means that 20% of the Premiership's fixtures are devalued as they were last season. These aren't nothing issues. These are very big issues for the sport. You hear all the fanfare for this wonderful rugby. It's very interesting, listening to Jamie George after the game that Saracens played against Bristol. Entertaining stuff, in terms of throwing the ball all over the place, attacking from everywhere, so on and so forth. George said at the end of it, well, the problem is that doesn't work at international level, and it doesn't.
I mean, point taken. At the same time, obviously, that Exeter-Newcastle battle, should that be the case. And by the way, Exeter is still 10th. We should forget. Sorry, Newcastle is still 10th, I should say, despite their win. That has consequence this year.
I know that.
And that obviously means that those games aren't. At least what we've got is a season where every game has that value. I know it's not the immediate relegation that the Rugby Paper podcast has been vouching for, but I would hope that it at least paves the way, one, for a galvanized Newcastle, and two, for at least a season where we can see what those stakes generate in its respective teams.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm not going to join this particular bandwagon, Ollie. We'll see. That's what I'd say.
I'm not a cheerleader, by the way. I'm absolutely not cheerleading by any stretch. But I also think, we can take a little bit of a feel good on the Newcastle players and coaches' behalf at the very least. After that serene debate, let's talk about red cards, which I'm sure will be equally calm and non-polarizing. It is probably the most polarizing law change debate I think I've seen in rugby over the past few years. I mean, there are knives coming out from all corners. Both camps are going at each other. Obviously, the IRFU and France Rugby have come out and spoken against it. I suppose to clarify what's happening for maybe the casual fan who isn't fully up to speed, the 20-minute red card, which has been in play in Southern Hemisphere club rugby since 2023, trialled in the Under-20 World Championships, trialled in the Rugby Championship, is being brought into play for the November internationals. What that means is that there are essentially 3 cards now. There's a 10-minute yellow card, a 20-minute red card for a sort of incident of it's a little bit of a grey area, but reckless, but maybe not malicious foul play, whereby a player will go off for the rest of the game, but 20 minutes later, a replacement will be able to come on. And then a red card, which is, for the worst of the worst. And I guess we'll see what that looks like in November. I know.
Actually, Ollie, it's not even that simple. If you really drill down to this, okay, there's an incident. The referee considers no incident at all, play on. There's a penalty. There's a yellow card. And what I've only just read in the small print is that the bunker will still be operating. So that yellow could yet be upgraded to a 20-minute red or a red. The ref can give a 20-minute red. He can give a red. So, I mean, that's about 6 options already that I've counted. And this is a guy on the hoof who's been trying to keep up with a 2-minute 30 passage of play.
And how long do you
in
think...
the ear from the TMO, in the ear from the assistant ref, in the ear from the crowd. And he's meant to adjudicate on intention as impossible as well as outcome. This is just madness. This is lawmaking from legislators who've gone insane. This isn't going to work.
How long do you think it would take for all of that, as you say, all of that white noise that they're facing, that it will take them to come to the sort of decision that, the magnitude of the decision that they have to come to? And as you say, judge the one thing that they're probably, they're not equipped to do really, other than an outright red card, recklessness or thuggery on the field. How are they meant to judge intent?
You can't. You cannot judge intent, because actually you can intend to do something initially, and that changes mid-tackle, mid-challenge, and you can get it wildly wrong. It's the outcome.
What this is? What this is another attempt by Southern Hemisphere unions to basically bounce the game into very big decisions that need greater scrutiny, and they really shouldn't be trialed, I don't think, in an international autumn series. They should have been trialed elsewhere so that they could see exactly the issues that you've raised about the amount of debate that goes on, the amount of dead time that we've got in terms of any incident being examined and so on. It's happened before. It's happening again now. They've got their proverbial knickers in a twist about it because, France and Ireland have said, hang on, let's have a closer look at this.
And there's so much that is unsatisfactory about this, Nick. My understanding is that, first of all, it's been trialled up here. It has been trialled in the south. It's been trialled here. What are the criteria that will decide whether this trial is a success or not? We need to be told that. The game need to be told that. Is it just going to three blokes in a pub in Dublin are going to meet and decide this?
Yeah.
The other thing is
I
they
mean,
actually, whoever these three blokes in a pub are, they're meeting on November the 14th in Dublin, at which stage just eight of the 21 autumn internationals have taken place. I mean, work that
yeah,
one out. It won't even be halfway through this
yeah,
trial.
nuts,
I mean, it
nuts.
is
I
just
mean,
nonsense.
Nigel Owens as well he's come out against, and he makes a very, very good point, which is basically that World Rugby is conflicted. On the one hand, it is trying to uh, basically say that player safety can't be at risk, and that there's no middle ground in this. That if there's thuggery or recklessness, a player deserves to be off the pitch, full stop. And that World Rugby is cutting the ground from under its feet because it wants to reduce the tackle height. It's pursuing, health and safety legislation, if you like, or laws within the game, and then it introduces something like this.
Well, you nail on the head there, Nick. This is the mudded thinking. I mean, deep down, we know what's going on here. 90% of red cards these days are not what we consider to be red cards. They are marginally high shots that have gone wrong by about 2 or 3 inches. Now, we know that. That's not really red. But the other thing is, World Rugby and all the unions are absolutely paralysed in fear of litigation. That when this big court case comes to court in 2026, they need to be able to say that we put everything in place to stop the high tackles. That's what they've done. But everybody in the game knows that this is nonsense. So you now get the fudge. Red card, but actually we need a little bit of a get-out clause here, sort of the Southern Hemisphere anyway. So let's have a 20-minute red card for those that really were what we consider, well, a yellow card really, was a bit unlucky. So typical fudge. And fudges never work, do they? Compromises almost never work in sport.
But those 2 to 3 inch tackles, and you're absolutely right. I think this is what they address. And obviously there have been some fairly farcical red cards over the past couple of years. Let's be that Freddie Stewart one, for example. That springs to mind, and that's sort of the taboo, the shoulder to head taboo. I think that's exactly what this is a product of.
But that's a bad refereeing decision.
No, that's a bad. All right, and maybe that wasn't a good example to give in that case. But all right, Beno Urbano, in the Premiership final, that was a tackle that probably went a little bit more than 2 or 3 inches. Let's say a foot wrong. Are we then saying that that's a yellow card in order to be able to improve rugby as a spectator sport? Because that's why this has been brought in, right? To stop a team being so heavily disadvantaged for potentially.
But there, I'm going to stop you. Just do not accept this heavily disadvantage. I can't remember the last time a team that had an early red card, a full 80-minute red card, got outplayed. It's often the making of the game. But our Southern Hemisphere cousins seem to be absolutely paranoid about it because New Zealand lost a very, very well contested and exciting World Cup final because they had a bloke sent off fairly early. So what? It happens all the bloody time. And most of the matches where red cards are issued early on are still great rugby matches.
The French have come up with a statistic they've taken. I'm not sure how large the sample is, but in the top 14, I think it may have been over the course of a season, is that teams who have been reduced by a player to 14 have lost only 60% of those games. So 40% win. But 4 teams with 14 players.
And I think Stuart Farmer came up with some percentages on the Premiership games, which are even a better. It's like something like 44% of short-handed teams from a sending off in the first half have won. So it's nonsense to suggest it ruins the game. It often makes the game.
So this was John Kerwin's argument. He's been, obviously unsurprisingly, given that he's come from the nations we've sort of been talking about in favour. He's saying that, it's for the people who paid £400 for a Rugby World Cup final ticket to see New Zealand's captain get sent off in the first half.
And he weren't sending off.
We've sort of argued, we've countered that to a degree, Ollie. You know, I mean, if John Kerwin's saying that New Zealand could never have won that game and that all New Zealand fans felt that they were shortchanged, I think that there's a counter argument to it, and quite a
Well, the
strong one.
counter argument is England beat Pumas down to 14 men for 72 minutes or whatever it is. It automatically happened. And just because you're on the losing side occasionally on that one, I don't think it's appropriate to go whinging. But they've obviously got to World Rugby. Can I just read out a little bit of the official communication? And right at the end of one of the things, it says the punishment is to be focused on the offending player, not the game. Well, first of all, I'm not even sure what that means, but I think they mean not the team, or is what they really mean. But absolutely, the team needs to share the punishment. That's the whole point of sending a bloke off, and the whole point of having discipline and cards and sending offs is that teams don't go recklessly round marauding for the full 80 minutes. You know, teams target players. 2 or 3 players will be told to get the scrum off. And if one of them gets sent off, that's the team's fault. You know, if they're going to pick those players and they're going to adopt those tactics, they have to take the hit. Now, the hit isn't fatal. Often they go on and win. But the team has to be part of the equation. It's not just an individual thing.
No, I completely agree with that. And I think just to add to that as well, the team should be punished because coaches teach tackle height, right? I mean, back when I last played rugby, and I won't mention because people will be able to figure out who it was. Obviously, people listening who know me will know, but we were taught 2-man tackles. One tackles the chest area around here, one tackles the shoulder area around here. And we had discussions post-training. It would be like, lads, what the shit are we doing here? Because if one of us gets it slightly wrong, we're going off. And so I completely agree with the team side of things because it's the product of a team philosophy. If everyone in Northampton was told to replicate Courtney Lawes, Northampton would never have a single red card.
You've got
I think that's very plain to see.
You've hit the nail on the head in some ways. I mean, one of the most extraordinary things about the tackle height issue is how difficult so many professional players seem to have found it to adapt their tackle technique. I mean, it really has been a significant problem. I mean, how many years now have we had, the reduced height tackle? Is it 3 seasons? Something of that sort.
Well, they've been on the case for 4 or 5 years, but legally.
And there are still offences all the time. I think that part of the problem, I mean, it's part of a wider problem about the rugby leaguing of rugby union, if you like. We now have so much flatline defence that if you look at, the tackle heights, a lot of them and tackling, as you've pointed out, one chest high, one for the shoulder. I mean, it's almost inevitable that one of those is going to ride up. And it's actually quite difficult for 2 men to hit one man hard at the same time. It does happen, but to control it is pretty difficult. So, my thing is that the tackle technique among pros is still, in terms of getting their body height right, is still, they've still got a sort of a reflex, which is about what they were taught, coming up through the ranks and so on and so forth.
And yet Courtney Lawes, age 36, adapted. Sam Underhill, can you ever remember a height?
He always went low, Brent. Courtney always went low.
Yes, he did always tackle low. Yes. Yeah. A very good example of what Ollie was talking about. The day after Sam Warburton got sent off correctly in the semi-final of the World Cup in 2011, we had a remarkable press conference with Sean Edwards, who was very candid and open and said, look, that's how I've been teaching the guys to tackle. Now, he possibly didn't want the final dump bit, but that was the Wales tackle technique. So as Ollie says, the team has to take the hit, has to take the responsibility, because that's how they were coached.
Team and coaches.
Yeah, team, yeah, absolutely.
No, I agree. And I think it sends the wrong philosophical message in terms of what coaches will be teaching, because coaches will sort of think, okay, well, the chop and top maybe allows for an offload. If we get 2 guys going high, obviously reduces the risk of offload, maybe potentially allows you to knock them back even further. And if stuff goes wrong, worst case, it's a 20-minute job rather than a 79-minute job. So I have reservations ideologically in terms of the message it sends.
Before we move on, can I just
I
make
was
one more
about to
point?
say,
And it illustrates something I was struggling to explain to Nick the other week. I don't know if you saw on YouTube, there was a monstrous hit from Bundyaki Connaught on the new centre, Leinster Osborne. I don't know if you saw it. Hit him about there. And it was absolutely front on the footage. And you can see the entire body, spine, wobble, and the head whiplash like it'd been caught in the wind. But it was an entirely legal tackle. Entirely legal.
yeah,
Hit him about there. And that, you know, no question of any. Well, of course, Twitterati thought it was red. It wasn't remotely a penalty. It was just a fantastic tackle. But that illustrates the absolute dilemma of what rugby union's got. That tackle potentially would have done much, much more neurological damage than any headshot you'll see this season.
Okay,
that could have caused massive damage.
I've got
and that's
one
what
question.
Rugby is sometimes. It's a dynamic collision sport.
I've got one question. What were the distances that were covered by both players? How far had Osborne come before he got hit?
He was sprinting full on for the line. He was in the act of scoring, full on the line. Aki came in from about 3 or 4 yards distance and just hit him with a belter, an absolute belter.
And how long had Osborne's run up been?
I can't remember exactly, but the bit of footage I've seen, he'd probably done, I don't know, 10 yards.
Okay, say 15 yards, something like that. So, you're looking at a significant, because he's off the runway basically, isn't he?
But it's the sort of collision you get all the time in rugby. That is an entirely legal tackle. This is my point.
So
rugby's obsessed with the head.
Was he injured? Was he injured?
No.
Did he go off?
Not knowingly. Didn't seem to be injured knowingly. But, the brain will have wobbled around and smacked up.
Was he given an HIA?
No, he should have been. But he wasn't.
Okay.
But when was the last time you saw an HIA for a bloke that gets red carded? For a bloke that does a red card tackle, how often does the victim get HIA these days? They just walk away.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like you're sort of leaning back toward. I remember we had that horrible debate at some point to do with boxers and body shots.
Yeah, no, exactly. But the point I'm trying to make is rugby's getting obsessed with headshots. It's a physical game. You pick it up any time.
Bren, what you're describing is, I wouldn't say it's the exception rather than the rule, but I would say that it is a distinct minority of tackles that end with that sort of whiplash impact.
I'll meet you halfway. I would say it's not the rule, but I think there's damn sight more of them in the game than you would appreciate. And exactly the same when you fall to ground heavy, when you're tackled, you still get that ripple effect through the body. And, that it's a physical contact sport. You either buy into it or you don't. Yeah. And to make out that it's all down to headshots is a nonsense.
It's interesting, isn't it, that, almost, I'm sure this is correlation rather than causation at best, but almost the fallout of the Sam Warburton red card, it feels like the dump tackle sort of slightly fell out of favour, and that trend sort of dissipated. I just wonder if that's where we are at the moment. Is we are at that sort of axis at the moment where it's how much of it do you allow? You don't get above the horizontal discussions as much as anywhere near as much as you get shoulder to the head discussions in rugby at the moment. And I suppose having gone from get under them and drive up, it's now get over them and drive down. And I think this red card represents World Rugby trying to sort of meet in the middle. But I guess, like you guys say, the meet in the middle is potentially even more of a problem causer.
It's horrific for referees.
Because the dump truck tackle was something that referees seem to uniformly get on top of pretty quickly. And the sanctions were hard and consistent. And that has put more or less of a stop to it. You'd have to say that the shoulder to head stuff is massively more inconsistent. And, there are glancing blows. There are, one of the most difficult things is obviously the height adjustment when people are going into tackles, because, they have to take it into account. If somebody's dropped their height by a couple of feet going into a tackle, and the tacklers already gone down,
Yeah.
but happens to be a headshot, or shoulder riding up. Very, very difficult.
Yeah.
It's a difficult a difficult judgment for referees.
But to wrap that up a bit, if they could just get on top of it, like they got on top of the dump tackles, if they could decide what is actually accidental, unlucky, unavoidable, they should make that a yellow card and just a straight yellow, because then you save the red with a real red card of penalty.
I think you're seeing more of that, Bren. To be fair,
I think there is a bit. The good refs are beginning to do it off their own bat.
More of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
That's an interesting point as well. And I do want to sort of move on because I think we've probably exhausted this topic between the three of us. But I do think it's come at a point where actually refereeing and allowing that little bit of mitigation has improved. I think that's been better. I mean, I don't know, Khaleesi's yellow in the Rugby World Cup final this time last year. That would probably be an example of a correct yellow that a year ago may have been a red. So maybe it's badly timed, and we, just allowing that sort of standardization, I suppose, is maybe the right word to go on for a little bit more, and the trial and error and the error sort of gauge narrows. Then maybe that would have. There was
a couple of very good ones in the Premiership over the weekend, brilliantly handled, which I fear, come the test, we're going to get into 20-minute red zone over. Where in fact, I think one of them was totally dismissed as an offence, and the other one was a penalty. And they were the sort of ones that I think in the test arena might well get a 20-minute red, and which fills me with fear, really, what's going to go on.
Well, look, if you're listening, particularly on YouTube, comment, but I'll be reading them. Comment below. Tell us we're idiots. We'll tell you no, I'm kidding. We won't tell you anything. Just have your say. Like I say, it seems to be chalk and cheese, and the two camps are very much incompatible. But the debate will go on throughout November, and as we sort of gun towards November, I expect it to be almost a weekly mention. Who's going to be the first 20-minute red in the Northern Hemisphere? That's a question we could play.
Quiz question: who was the first player to score a try while temporary replacement? When first ever temporary replacement season, first player to score a try in a test match.
Come on, put us out of our misery.
Eddie Halvey.
No,
Ireland v Wales, 95 World Cup.
Okay,
I think.
I think I was thinking of the cricket equivalent, the concussion substitute. And the first ever one of those was Marnus
Labuschagne.
Guys, let's talk very quickly about I reckon let's record for another 5-10 minutes or so. The autumn, obviously we're gearing towards it at the moment, and I think we'll probably do a slightly more full-blown preview conversation next week and the week after that. We've got Alex Cuthbert coming on in a couple of weeks' time. Sione Tuipulotu has been named captain of Scotland. That's sort of been the biggest story to come out of the naming of squads. Finn Russell maybe wasn't the success story at captain that he potentially could have been, but I think we saw it not quite working out anyway, just because of the type of general he is. Tuipulotu, I was surprised initially, and then actually it's sort of settled, and he has probably been Scotland's glue, or certainly the backline's glue, over the last 3 years. And initially sort of drafted into the team as a replacement, he has become indispensable. So certainly in terms of who he is to that team, I think that can't be questioned. I'm sure you guys will both agree with that.
Totally. I mean, just on Finn, by the way, I think Finn is a leader, but he's not necessarily a captain. I mean, you look what he's done at Bath, where he's got the captain in Ben Spencer, but Finn Russell was very much a leader at Bath. And I think that is probably the model he wants to conduct at Scotland. I mean, this has only just come out today. I wouldn't be at all surprised if he went to Gregor Townsend and said, actually, do you mind if I become the lieutenant? So I think I can't see any downsides on that call. It seems to me pretty good.
Yeah. Nick, what are your thoughts?
These things are always difficult because I don't know what Russell's attachment to the captaincy is or has been. And I mean, is there a sense that he's sort of given the thumbs up to this change, or that he has, or is that a bit of spin for our consumption?
So you're wondering whether Russell stepped down himself first or whether Gregor made the decision?
I'm wondering whether Gregor made the decision. And I mean, listen, it's very unlikely that somebody's going to, excuse me, that somebody's going to, you know, not accept it, if you like, and come out against it. But I mean, Russell, I'm sure, is a pretty proud bloke, and having the captaincy taken away from you when Scotland had been performing, I suppose, over and above what they had been for a long time down in the doldrums. I just wonder whether it's met entirely with his approval, and he's obviously they're both key players, both key midfield players, but I just wonder what the real story is, in a sense. Tuipulotu is as solid as a rock as a player. And I don't know whether he's the Glasgow captain. If he is the Glasgow captain, obviously they are the reigning URC champions. So somebody did something very right there. And I'm not convinced necessarily that it'll be something that will have been greeted with a great deal of joy by Finn Russell.
I'm sure something will come out in the wash in the coming days, but I don't see it as a big issue. Like I say, many people would have expected him to captain Bath because when he went there, he was the Scotland captain, and he hasn't missed a beat there as a leader and a lieutenant. So I think he'll slot into that role. I think he's probably got to the stage of his career now where Lions season as well, he just wants to play the best rugby he can this season. I'm sure that's what Gregor Townsend wants from him, and I'm sure Finn Russell wants to be the starting 10 for the Lions. And I think it's all about him as a player
So
now.
you think taking the load off to a degree, do you?
A little bit. I think that would be the expression I'd use.
Mm.
But I'm sure we'll find out. The Scottish press normally get to the bottom of these things fairly quickly, don't they?
Yeah.
I think the other thing to say, in terms of Tuipulotu's performances, he's one of the few centres in the world, actually, who I think has had 2 or 3 consistently not just good, but improving seasons as well.
Yeah.
I think he's got better every single year. So I think his value to the team can't be understated in that sense. And I don't know how Finn will feel. I think from a Lions perspective, Finn will feel he can make a really good run and sort of crack on with that in a much better way. I also wonder the game against Ireland sticks to mind in the Six Nations, and whether that raised a few alarm bells, where I don't think he took captaincy and the game itself by the scruff of the neck when the win was there for the taking. And you just wonder whether he would feel more able to do that as a backup leader rather than the main leader when he already is so in attack.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, interestingly, actually, the Glasgow captain is Carl Steyn. So
that's what I thought. Yeah, I was just looking it up. It's not Tuipulotu, but I don't think Carl Steyn will be captaining Scotland anytime soon.
It's been a bit of a hot potato, hasn't it, the Scotland captaincy? We were just trying to, in the last couple of years, they bounced between Ritchie, Darge, Finn Russell now.
Hogg first,
and Hogg first. So you kind of think perhaps they need a bit of stability there as captain.
Yeah, we were trying to figure it out, and again, let us know in the comments if we've got this wrong. My take on it is that it was Hogg, then Ritchie, then Darge and Russell were made co-captains, from which Russell became captain, and now here we are. But I could absolutely be wrong about that, and there would have been the odd captain thrown in for a game where they were rested. But you're right. You need captaincy stability. Any successful side has that. So you'd imagine Tuipulotu has several caps left in him. It's just whether he can do all of them as skipper. I guess we'll see. That it's not a typical captaincy position, 12. is it? You're three out from the pack.
Will Carling.
Will Carling is one example. I mean, I struggle to think of too many international captains beyond him. That captain from 12, but there might be exceptions to prove.
What was Umanga? Was Umanga a 12? I think he was, wasn't he?
He was a 12/13. Yeah.
But yeah, listen, I mean, it's not always the go-to position for a captain. But the man with a grandma from Greenock looks as if he's certainly got credibility within that team in a big way. I mean, he's been defensively, he's been outstanding, and attack-wise, again, I mean, he's just been extremely consistent, and I guess that's what high standard consistency is what you look for in a captain, and he ticks that box.
100%. Guys, I think we'll wrap up. We've covered quite a lot of bases there, and I'm conscious that we have an autumn internationals related base to cover, but let's save that for next week. The only thing I wanted to mention, actually, and this is just a sort of encouragement to those listening to go and have a look at the story about Wayne Barnes's heart restarting during Rugby World Cup 2023. It was he had an episode during a running drill partway through the tournament, and he's a former guest on the podcast, and obviously an incredibly valued member of the rugby community, and he went on to captain the final as we predicted that he would. Referee the final as we predicted he would. It's a phenomenal story to read about. It is in his latest book, and we encourage you to go and do so because it's amazing to hear about.
Yeah.
On that note, guys, I'll see you next week. Next week, we'll do a little bit of New Star, we'll do a little bit of Autumn, and we'll see where the red card debate is at. Thanks for listening to this week's edition of the Rugby Paper Podcast, and don't forget to subscribe on whichever podcast platform you use and recommend the show to your friends. The Rugby Paper is available to buy every Sunday, and to make sure you don't miss it, subscribe to our print, digital, and online options at therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions. That's therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions to get all our content for as little as 14p per day.